Hey, welcome to Broken World Entertainment, and this is our review for episode 5 of The Rings of Power. Oh, this was a sluggish one to get through, really was. So, we open this episode with Nordy and the wizard, and he's mumbling to himself, and she starts having a conversation with him. They're looking out over this vast, kind of foresty looking landscape, and she starts explaining to him that there's perils out there. And when he's asked basically what perils are, she's describing it to him that, it's big people, wolves, orcs, all these types of things, trolls. And he says he believes he's peril, and she says, no, you're not bad, you're good. And then we go to the rest of them. Well, when I say the rest of them, Nordy's family and her friend Poppy. By the way, where's this one's Poppy's family? Why is she with them? But the next, 2 minutes or something are literally them going on their journey and Poppy singing. They want her to sing a song, and she sings a song as we watch a map. And the map moves along, and you see different little areas, and it's kind of like Indiana Jones, when the planes are flying, the little red line. And it just brought up the question when I was watching that scene. I was like, how much time is passing? Because they are going huge distances on this map, and it's just like, really, how much time is actually passing? Especially when we get back to everyone else, it seems like only a day or so has passed. It's like, what way are they doing the time in this? And from then, we immediately go to the Evil Gnomes. Yep, we got our first shot of Slim Shady and the other nun, who find where the crash site basically of the wizard. And if anyone doesn't know, these nuns believe that the wizard that came down is Sauron, and they're devoted to Sauron, so they're searching for him. Then we go to Adar, or Adar, I believe they call it Adar, and the orcs. The orc is burning in the sun, and he has a conversation, and he's telling the orcs it's about time, or the time is upon them to go marching. And then we go to Bronwyn and Don Lemon Elf. Can't remember what his name is. Don't particularly care. What's his name? Arndorny or some shit like that. I don't know. Who cares? Black Elf. And she starts giving a speech to the people about standing and fighting against the orcs. And everyone's on her side almost straight away. They're all like, yeah! And then the old dude, the barman dude, comes out and is like, now we gotta give up. We'll survive. And then half of them like, yeah, to him and follow him. He wants to surrender. And we all know why he wants to surrender. He's a supporter of Sauron, so he obviously wants to go there. So then we go to Numenor. And the captain and his son are talking. They're talking about, the son is Isildur, the guy who eventually cuts off the fingers of Sauron. And so they're talking. He wants to come to war with them in the Southlands on Middle Earth. And he's like, no, you screwed up. You got kicked out of the what are they called? Ship masters or something, or sea guards. And then he got kicked out of that. Then we go to the daughter, who's talking with Pharazon's son. And you start realizing that they don't want them to go. That they don't want to help Gladriel. I don't know where the daughter came into the whole anti-elf thing, but all of a sudden she seems to be anti-elf, which is weird. And then we get a shot of Hellbrand, aka Sauron. Shh, don't tell anyone. In the forge. He managed to get into the forge, and he's building a sword, and he hands it to the forge master, and he's impressed with what he made. Then we go to Gladriel and Miriel, the Queen Regent, and they're discussing going to fight for the Southlands. And the Queen wants to know, is Hellbrand actually going to go with them? And Gladriel is explaining she has her word that he'll go. The difference is Hellbrand doesn't want to go. So we get then a scene with Gladriel and Hellbrand, and she's saying like she's convinced the Queen to send people. They're going to send 5 ships with 500 people. Excuse me. My throat always gets dry doing these things. I start coughing. But and he basically is like, you don't know who I am. You don't know what I've done. I don't want to go home. So then we're back with the Harfoots, and they're in the woods, and Nori and Poppy come across wolf tracks. To then we go to Lenry Henry. Couldn't think of his name there. His character and one of the wives. By the way, the wife, I'm assuming it's his wife. The character who's got like the real thick Hollywood version of the Irish accent. Yeah. Oh, Tommy, I saw a tato. All of a sudden, she doesn't have that accent. She's got more of a Yorkshire in England accent, which is weird. But she's saying, we gotta be careful. And she's convinced that the bad things that are starting to happen is the wizard. She buggers off to find food. She's picking mushrooms off a tree, and Nordy and Poppy run up and scare the shit out of her, trying to tell her that they saw wolf tracks. And all of a sudden you hear a noise and the wolves come running. They go running, to jump up into a tree, and the wizard comes out of nowhere. And you've seen this in the trailer where you see the 3 wolves and the wizard standing there. And the wizard ends up using powers. He slams his fist into the ground and sends a shockwave out and throws the 3 wolves that get up and run away. But he seems to have just like a big, almost like a burn mark or something on his arm after doing that. Then we go to one of the possibly the stupidest scenes of this episode. We're back in Numenor, and Gladriel comes walking up and sees the captain watching his men train. And she kind of hints that they're shit at what they're doing. So he's like, well, any help on hand, go ahead. So she goes up to train them. Yep. And she goes, basically, you're too stupid to know everything, so I'll only explain it to you this way. And she says, you stab, twist, gut. That's it. And so she starts training, and she tells them, anyone who can beat me or get a cut in you'll be promoted and all this shit. So the bloke who got kicked off the sea guard with Isildur, you know, the black dude, he comes for the fighter. And he's trying and trying, and he can't do it. And then the other friend jumps in, and the two of them can't get it done. She disarms the other friend. Now she's two swords. She keeps telling them things that she's doing it like, you know, it's not about the sword, it's about movement of your feet. You fight with your feet and all this stuff. Then they all just pile on her. None of them can get her. The captain's daughter sees this and is like, ooh. And the black friend puts the sword through. She blocks it. But you see it's kind of against the arm. She knocks them all away, says whatever she says, and then realizes a bit of her sleeve is cut, and she looks at him and says, well done, you know. So he gets promoted to lieutenant from that. And from there we go to Pharazôn and his son talking, and the son is trying to convince Pharazôn not to go to the war, not to go to fight. That they're basically, we can't take orders from an elf. And the fathers, they're basically kind of discussing almost throwing over the queen to rule themselves. But the father's doing one of these kind of manipulation tactics where it's like, of course I'll go fight for the Southlands. And he basically explains, imagine what will happen if we go down there and fight for them. They'll be in our debt, so we can open all these trade routes and everything else. And it won't be victory for the elves, it'll be victory for us. But the son really wants to kind of not have that happen. The queen got summoned by her father, so we get her talking with him, and he's trying to convince her not to go to Middle Earth. And when she's asking why, he's like, because there's darkness at Middle Earth. Then we're back to Nori and the wizard, and the wizard has his arm in like a little puddle. And Nori's talking to him, and she looks down, and the water's starting to freeze. And she's like, what's going on here, you know? And the water's freezing, but then his arm starts to freeze, and the freezing is coming up his arm, and she's trying to tell him to stop because she must think it's hurting him or something. She grabs his arm, and her hand starts to freeze as well. And it keeps freezing and freezing, and then as it stops freezing, it kind of explodes, and she goes flying, and now she's terrified of him. Then we go to Elrond and Durden at a dinner with Celebrimborn. He's sitting there. Gilgalad is having the conversation and wants to know why the dwarves do what they do and kind of stuff. So Durden asks a question of Gilgalad and wants to know about the table, and gives him this story that this stone that it's on, it's this sacred stone to the dwarves, that they use it for temples and headstones and tombs and stuff to honor their dead. So Gilgalad tells him, like, yeah, like, I'll send this back with you, you know, so it can have the respect it deserves, and and stuff like this, right? And they're in Lindon at this stage, and they start having a conversation. After the dinner, Gilgalad and Elrond, and Gilgalad is asking Elrond what he saw up there. What are the elves doing? And Elrond explains that he took an oath for Durden, and it means a lot to him that he's not going to break his oath. So Gilgalad knows about Dior, Mithril. At least he knows the story of it. He doesn't know whether they found it yet or not. So he shows Elrond the tree. Remember, was it the first or second episode? I think it was the first, where the leaf comes down and it's kind of got the cancer coming through it. He shows him, and the tree is dying. And he explains to him, if they have that kind of ore, it can restore elves, because that leaving is in fact the elven lifespan being drained. And he explains the story of where Mithril came from, which was an old elf fighting the Balrog. And you get a very, very quick glimpse of a flashback kind of thing of just a elven knight that stands with his shield up, a tree in the middle, and the Balrog with his whip. And their battle apparently created Mithril. So that's where that comes from. But he's still not willing to give up his pack with Durden. Then we go back to Numenor, and Ting wants the son. Tingy Bob. Jesus, why can't I think of his name now? You know who I'm talking about. He wants to go to war. He wants to go to the south. And his father's like telling him no. But he really wants to. And he ends up having a conversation with his buddies and trying to convince them Isildur. And he wants his friends, now that his friend is being promoted to lieutenant, to reinstate him. And he's like, well, no. So he lets him hit him twice. So the dude hits him and still tells him no. And just says to him, like, I hope one day you find something that, you know, you're willing to give up something or whatever it was. Yeah. So we then find out that Farazan's son is sneaking on to one of the ships. And of course, once you see that, you think it's actual thing. The Isildur. Until he comes down into the hold of the ship, he takes off his hood, and you go, oh, it's the other jackass who's got a lantern, and he breaks open oil. It has to be oil. It's something flammable anyway. And then you see Isildur is actually hiding on the ship as well. And he's like, what are you doing? He's like, are you stowing away? And he goes, are you sabotaging the boat? They fight over the lantern. The lantern falls, but doesn't fall into the oil. What happens is Farazan's son's cloak catches fire. Isildur takes it off him, and the two of them throw it, and it lands next to the fire and sets off the fire. They run up onto deck. Farazan's son, whose name I don't know, don't care, gets knocked out, and all of a sudden the ship explodes, which causes the ship beside it to explode. So they lose two of the ships. So then we go up to and the captain and all sees this happening, and they're like, quick, do this so we don't lose any more ships, and blah blah blah. And then Isildur comes swimming up with the dude, and they're like, what the hell happened? And Isildur says someone on a rowboat went out to it and caused it and whatnot, and that he found the son or whatever. So we go up to Galadriel, Miriel, Farazan, and they're all talking, and they explain we lost two ships and stuff. And Galadriel is trying to convince Miriel that no, we still need to go and fight, and Farazan is very much now trying to push the whole, no, it's not a good idea. Now he's trying to convince Mario not to go. I don't think he knows yet that his son did this, because he very much wanted to go. Then we go to, the Queen then says, like, we'll convene a meeting in the morning to make a final decision. Oh, by the way, the people in the High Chamber stuff aren't happy that they're actually going to help the Halbrand's people. Which aren't his people, because he's Sauron. Shh. So then we go to Elrond and Celebrimbor, and they're actually discussing the mithril. And Elrond shows Celebrimbor the piece of mithril that Durden gave him as a token of their friendship. And he basically explains, if you could convince them, then we could be grand. Then we go to Halbrand, who's in the forge working, and Galadriel comes in. They have a talk. She's trying to convince him to go, and this is where he's really kind of putting down the fact that she doesn't know who he is, that he comes from darkness, and she's like, we've all come from darkness at some stage. And they have a bit of a discussion as to why she's so hell-bent on going to the south. By the way, if anyone doesn't know what exactly the south lands are that he comes from, that's Mordor. That's where Mordor forms. And because she says her darkness comes from losing her brother to the orcs and stuff. So he says to her basically, so your quest is vengeance. Why don't you just stop fighting? She says, because she can't. Whatever that's supposed to mean. And then we go to the villagers that surrendered, coming up to the orcs. And as they're there, Adar, and the barman, he's there, and the barman fella, the old dude, comes up and bows down to him and says, like, he's waited years to reconnect with these people and stuff, and that he pledges his allegiance to Sauron, which the elf Adar looks at him and comes over and grabs him and slams him to the ground. And you realise, well, you don't realise it, he says it, that the old dude thought that Adar was Sauron. He thinks he is Sauron. So after he slams him to the ground, Adar grabs Theo's friend, the young dude who got scared shitless from a cloud last week and done a runner. Grabs him, puts him on the ground, throws a knife to the old dude and says, you can only be binded by blood. So he's obviously has to kill him, and it looks like he is going to kill him. It doesn't show what happens, but the dude is pleading with the old guy not to do it. And then the scene jumps to Theo and Dan Lemonelf training. They're firing arrows. And they're talking about having to go to the fight and stuff. And then Theo's kind of like, what's the point in us staying here fighting? And Black Elf is explaining, look, I've seen things, your people have learned to survive, all this type of stuff. And he's like, yeah, half of our people left. And he's convinced that there's no reason to fight, but all of a sudden he shows him the hilt of the sword, and Lemon Elf goes, I've seen this before, and walks over to a wall just next to where they're standing and pulls off like ivy off the wall and there's like a tree stump there with the full carving of Sauron's sword. And they're like, oh no, what's this mean? So Lemon Elf goes up and shows Bronwyn the hilt and tells her it's a key and stuff. And immediately she wants to give up. The woman who was like, we gotta stay and fight and blah blah blah, she's like, well, we're fucked, may as well give up. And it's like, what do you mean? And she says to him, like, how long do you think we have? And he's like, days, maybe hours. So she's like, yeah, screw it, we gotta give up. And he's trying to convince her, and they go down and just start having this full-on conversation about her wanting to give up and shit. In front of everyone. Everyone's just standing there watching, and it's like, they're probably sitting there going, bitch, we just said, no, we'll stay and fight for you. By the way, she's like, I know I'm not the king you asked for, but I'm asking you to come with me. So it's all girl power in this show. All the women are making the decisions. But now she's like, we should just give up. You know, better to survive than to be annihilated. And it's like, wow. And then we go to the orcs and Adar, and we're just watching his armies march. And a few hours, more like a few fucking minutes, because the screen pans up from them marching and there's the tower they're at right there. You're like, oh, none of you's noticed all these torches coming, no? Alright. So then we go to Elrond and Durden, and they're having a conversation in the woods. And the scenes with Durden is actually a good character in this show. He's the only thing, really. Him and the other dwarves, they're really the only likable part of this show. But you see two of the dwarven soldiers walking, pans up from them, and there's a load of elves carrying that table, like the stone from the table. And then Durden and Elrond are behind them, and they start to have a conversation. Elrond turns around to him and says, like, you made that story up about the table, didn't you? About the stone. And Durden just goes, Dees has been on to me for ages about getting a new table, so... And Elrond just literally goes, what? It's not that heavy. So, Durden is pretty cool in this. So he starts having the conversation. Elrond starts having the conversation with him, saying, like, I haven't been truthful with you. And there's like, look, just spit it out, will you? So he says he didn't actually go back to meet him for friendship. It was to find something. And then he brings up the mithril and says, you know, he didn't know that that's what he was sent there to find, but now that he found it. And then he explains to Durden why they need it, and tells him, like, the entire elven race's fate is now in your hands. And he likes the sounds of that, you know. He's like, say it again, and he keeps getting Elrond to say it back to him. He's like, whose hands? He's like, your hand. So Durden agrees, okay, get your men and let's go and try and mine this stuff. And then they just have to try and convince Durin the Third, the king, Durin, to allow them to mine again. And Elrond says, you know, we'll all do it on one condition, that you tell Disa the table is from me. And he's like, yeah, not a hope. And then we just see Gilgalad was watching them, so he's obviously happy. And then we finally get to the bloody end of this episode, which, thank Christ, it was Hellbrand being summoned by the Queen, and he's in the forge, and as he's gone, he throws down that little pouch with the crest on it. That is what convinced Gladriel he's the king of the South. And it looks like he's going to go up to the Queen and say he's not going, and all of a sudden his hand comes back and takes the pouch, and then he's in armour on horseback. The Queen's there, everyone's there. The armies are being loaded onto the ships. The captain's daughter, who by the way is a made up daughter and sister in this for Isildur, and she sees Isildur. Because he saved the other dude, he was allowed to come. So they all get onto the ships, and they're all like, "Yep, we're going to Middle Earth. We're going to fight." Blah blah blah. Isildur's father gives him. Bruce says, "You're to report to such and such," and he goes, "I thought I was in army or something." And he says, "Yeah, I'm cleaning duty." And they all start laughing, and he laughs. And then they all part. And what do we get coming onto the ship? Warrior Gladriel. Oh yes, Gladriel in full armour, who walks over and extends her hand to Hellbrand, and the two of them hand in hand, and it's like, we're going to war. And that's the end of the goddamn episode. Thank Christ. Oh, the one thing this episode actually has is the visuals for landscapes and stuff were great. Because it looked like they were actually in real places. Mainly with Nordy Brandyfoot and those. The wolves looked terrible. But the woods and stuff, yeah, it looked like they really went to these places. So that was the episode. And we're only at episode 5. What is there in this? Is there 8? I think it's 8, or is it 10? Oh, Jesus. Too many, let's put it that way. But anyway, that's it for episode 5 of Rings of Power. So, if you've seen it, let us know what you thought of it. Do you even like Rings of Power? Have you watched it? Do you care? It's not Lord of the Rings, that's for sure. But anyway, I'll leave it there for this one. Cheers. Catch you in the next.